Welcome to When Movies Were Good, a laid-back discussion about all your favourite films from the silent era up until 1959. You can hear our channel's content on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow all new updates and events on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Please give us a thumbs up or a good review, whatever your favourite podcast channel allows for. It helps to get us in front of more people. And now, on with the show.
Hello everyone and welcome to the last edition of 2022 for When Movies Are Good, here with Rachel, your ever-loving host, and my special weekly guest star co-host, Matt. And we're being joined on the phone. We're doing it 80s style again tonight, Matt. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm afraid it's owing to me. It's not exactly been weekly, but I'm glad we could fit this one in for the end of the year.
Yes,
we had to do a Christmas special, of course. It would be a sin to finish the year without it.
Matt and I just had a bit of a weird year this year. I think everyone still has after COVID and everything, and Matt just had a lot with being a new dad, being a new husband, being a new homeowner. So, and because we just don't live as close to each other, it's been a little bit harder to sort of coordinate schedules to be able to get together in person. And then I have, as the listeners must already know, many issues with my internet connection here. So Zooming and doing other sort of over the, internet stream sort of calls and stuff, it just hasn't been happening for us. So that's why we're using sort of old technology. And I appreciate Matt bearing with me while we discuss the 1938 A Christmas Carol based on the very famous Charles Dickens novella, A Christmas Carol, which came out, Matt, in 1843, and it's still going strong.
Yes. Yeah, well, I've actually just started listening to an audiobook. So I had read it a few years ago, and I found it a very touching story when I did first read it, because many people think of the story right now as simply a children's story about a curmudgeon-y grandfather type, but a lot of people don't realize what a strong social commentary the novel was when it was first released, because this was a time when the popular attitudes towards how to treat the poor were quite harsh by modern standards. And so hearing the audiobook again, which is Hugh Grant has a great version, which you can get for free on you can get that for free on Audible currently, and so that's actually quite a nice fresh way to hear the story. If you're not used to Victorian age literature, audiobooks can be a great way to sort of bring the words to life. And it reminded me of the sort of real heart that Dickens had behind the words, because he was really Dickens really was the social champion of the poor. He I don't know how much you know about him, Rachel, but he was very much almost on the street himself when he was young because of accidental circumstances, and he became extremely successful with his writing, and he had a great social conscience.
Such a venerated sort of character, but a lot of people know the name, at least people sort of, over 30 and onwards. I'm not sure about the TikTok generation, but you don't actually realise his background was his father had gone to jail, I believe, and that made him, obviously, that put his family into dire straits. So he had to leave school. Oh, debtor's prison. Oh, okay.
Well, not jail. It was like debtor's prison. Now they just garnish you. Now they just garnish your earnings.
Oh,
back
right.
then, I think
so it wasn't jail, but it was sort of like
sort
a
of go to prison and have a bond paid or something.
In financial hardships, was it? Sort of.
Pretty much. It was yes. It was very much a stick.
But I think that had
a stick to make you
quite
reach
a bad
for the carrot
impact. One, because the father was in debt, obviously, meaning the family was. So that meant that he had to leave school, and I was just reading that he was working in a factory when he was like 12 or so. So, and obviously he didn't want to leave school. So, that would have shaped him a lot. So that makes a lot of sense. The other aspect of the sort of Victorian age, which was a very long age of Queen Victoria, very similar to the long of her great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth, was the fact that her and her husband, Albert, got a lot of these, traditions that we take for granted now going again, like things like Christmas carols, Christmas tree, that sort of archetypal sort of celebration of Christmas. I didn't actually realise that they were responsible for getting that going again, so to speak, or getting it into the more modern age sort of thing.
Yes, well, Victoria and Albert, they were among the first quite popular poster and newspaper. Like, we're used to seeing the royals in every sort of popular cultural publication now, but it was a lot newer a concept when they were around. And Albert, like, the UK had kind of around the 17th century when it had a period when there was a strength from the Puritan types of religion where that didn't like the idea of one day being more sacred than the other. They tried to suppress a lot of sort of folk traditions, including traditional Christmas celebrations that used to involve a lot of loud revelries and the like. And that meant that in the UK and by an extension America, until the quite late 19th century, it was for many communities just another day. Like, it was acknowledged as Christ's traditional birthday, but not much more. But when you had from the continent a lot more positive feeling towards Christmas, including traditions like the Christmas tree, and of course when Victoria marries a German prince, Albert, he brought a lot of those customs with him. So we kind we owe to Queen Victoria the white wedding dress, and to Albert we owe the Christmas tree.
In society during their long period together.
And this book, the story itself, A Christmas Carol, helped consolidate a lot of traditional Christmas sentiments, like certain eating customs, even just the concept of it being a sort of more joyous occasion. I think obviously traditions can sometimes get hard to become universally placed when you're dealing with a lot of opposing interests, and I think Scrooge's complaint about paying somebody for a day off is probably something that a lot of employers begrudge even now.
Everybody is probably familiar.
But back then it wasn't such an overwhelming custom.
Are obviously very familiar with the story. So we're doing the 1938 version here. It was just a version that we chose because it was sort of towards the earlier period of the films that we discussed. So this actually is, even though it has a real English feel about it, it is an American version of A Christmas Carol, but obviously set in the UK. So Reginald Owen stars as Ebenezer Scrooge in this film. Directed by Edwin L. Marin. The screenplay was by Hugo Butler, obviously based on Charles Dickens' novella. Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who has produced and been involved with a lot of films that we've discussed. Also starring in this production was Reginald Owen, who I really liked in this role, was in the title role of, some films are called Scrooge, this one's called A Christmas Carol, but he's in the main role. We had Jean Lockhart, Kathleen Lockhart, Terry Kilburn, Barry McKay, and Lynn Carver rounding out the cast. And the music was done by Franz Waxman.
Terry Kilburn,
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Terry Kilburn, the one that played Tony Sin, we actually saw him in Goodbye Mr. Chips, if you remember.
I did actually mention that, and it was released, December 16th, 1938. It has a great running time. Matt knows I love this because I just feel that a lot of films are excessively long for no reason to be. 69 minutes. That's what I'm talking about. So and it does it nicely too.
Yeah, it could almost be yeah, I mean, even though this was like almost 10 years into the silent era, it almost has the quality of a silent film, which tended to be shorter as well. The sort of the movement of the storyline is quite rapid, even though they used a lot of the dialogue from Dickens himself. He did have quite a flair for language. The story they've managed to cover the three segments it's broken down into pretty evenly. And yes, within 69 minutes, the story's gone through. I guess they didn't want to keep it too long for a family-oriented film.
Some of the animated theatrical versions they've done are quite dark compared to this version, yes.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking it's around this time when you had the Snow White movie, and just thinking of those scenes of the logs almost eating Snow White in the swamp.
The great Lionel Barrymore was originally due to do the role of Scrooge, and he had bad arthritis problems, as here in some of the notes. But he did narrate the trailer. I just think the cast was great anyway, and a young June Lockhart, who played one of the children of as the Cratchits. So Jean and Kathleen Lockhart played the Cratchits. Their daughter June, I just know her because I'm a big fan of, as you know, because I've referenced that Matt is the Jonathan Harris of this podcast, meaning the weekly guest star, and that's obviously taken from Jonathan Harris from Lost in Space, and June Lockhart was the mother in Lost in Space. Obviously, you know, a great period of TV because we all know who had a hit series at that point. I didn't want to bring Larry up again, but, you know, it had to be done. I had to find some way. But what I liked about this,
regular listeners will know what you mean.
It was condensed. It obviously is a little bit lighter, so they show scenes at the start of the film, the group of boys playing in the street, and they're doing something called ice sliding, which is seems like you're going to break your neck if you do it, but they seem to be having a great time. I don't think people voluntarily, if they live in snowy areas, like to ice slide because it normally denotes that they're going to have an accident, but these boys have mastered the habit of it. I also like the way they worked in Scrooge's nephew into this. I know he's in the novella as well, but I like the way they had sort of him as a prominent role at the start as well. But things just seemed a bit lighter in this film, like they just approached it from a bit of a different angle. And even with the ghosts, when they arrive, as the listeners will know and will be familiar with the story of Scrooge, who's visited by three ghosts who take him through various elements of his past life, his present life, and what his future life may be. So they kind of fiddled around with the timeline, you know, as compared to the novella. When they show up, they all just come on the one night. And Matt, I think in the novella they come at different nights, do they? Or they come at different points that's a bit different to how this film had it.
They in the novella they come, I think, on three separate nights, and which is strange. It seems like a bit of a inefficient way. But then when I think of how Dickens approached stories, like obviously he wrote in a different time, and perhaps it was more fashionable to have the story more drawn out. But if you read A Christmas Carol at the beginning, it's a bit weird. It begins with this whole like probably 2 or 3 page extra storyline about just confirming that this person
Molly,
at the beginning is dead, and he almost so this is Scrooge's old business partner, and to cover a fairly minor plot point, Dickens almost rambles on all this whole period, and he did a similar thing in the beginning of Oliver Twist, and I think that's part of it was the fashion at the time to sort of be a bit more poetic with certain points, but because he had quite a creative humor almost. You forgive him for it, even though you know that the likes of Hemingway would be like just cut it down to one sentence, you soft quill pusher.
Even though they're speaking technically the same language, the English authors and the American authors would have a vastly different way of going about telling the same story. But I do love, the ideas of these ghosts, and I think that's one of the best elements of this story, these three very different ghosts, especially this first one of his dead business partner, Jacob Marley, and that's just such a great name, and I think anyone that would get that role, I actually thought the special effects for 1938 were fantastic.
I love the special effects they used for his ghost.
Yeah, I actually thought the whole film was.
They would have had
the cinematography,
they would have
the way it was
done
lit.
something to do with double exposing the film or
the music
something.
was used beautifully, and you're right. The way that they portray Jacob Marley, there's a production here in our home city here in Australia of Melbourne at the moment. They're doing something I think that's come down from the West End, which is a big production of A Christmas Carol. I believe it's. I want to say it's a musical. But I'm not 100% sure. I just know it's a big sort of lavish production of it. And I was even looking at how they did Jacob Marley in that production. I still think this 1938 version does very well. There's a lot the costume designer, the production designer, the effects team can do with Jacob Marley, because he is, in the book is described as being literally in chains, the chains that sort of came from his real life into his afterlife, chains of money and locks and this and that sort of surround him. And I just thought they did a great job in this film. And just the whole concept of Jacob Marley is brilliant. I mean, he could have a film probably in his own right. And I'm sure there probably is a story or a film that they've made about Jacob Marley that we're not aware of. But I really enjoyed this film because it just got to the point and it just told you the story. And I am keen to say, I was discussing with Matt before we started recording, that there's a few other versions I'm keen to see. I have never seen Bill Murray's Scrooged, which came out in 1988, which I would like to see. I might actually watch that on Christmas Day. And then I was watching some obscure 1970s telly movie with Henry Winkler, a.k.a. Fonzie from Happy Days, and it had a different name to it, and it was set in a different era, and it's set up in Maine. And it was about, their version of A Christmas Carol with this different person. I got up to the part where he was going around repossessing things from people's homes. So I need to actually finish that off. But even that was quite interesting, but it just goes to show you the timeless appeal of this story. And Matt, what would you say the moral of this story is? It's you can be shown the error of your ways and still gain redemption. I mean, I think that's definitely what this film version showed us, and all versions do, really.
Well, as far as the original book, a big part is just simply that. We hear we're used to hearing the slogan in current politics, right. Black Lives Matter. Well, back then you could say the equivalent that the point of the story is that poor people's lives matter, which is a big which is a big part of it. It was trying to encourage sort of the right of the less fortunate to exist. I think that's the main motto that carries in a lot of adaptations, even though the story is almost, to an extent, depending on which one, can be a little bit trivialized depending on how they're trying to push the story. And even though and even if they're setting it in Dickens' time, a lot of the versions, they may sort of present a more sort of rose-tinted idealization of the Victorian era, but we forget how grim it could be once you got to the East End of London in those days, and with poor labour conditions and everything. So that's why I think I almost have ideas myself for a sort of an adaptation that is a lot more realistic in how they portray that time. and it's like a story that one of the stories that every generation tries to put their own stamp on. Sometimes like 10 different films within one generation, and one issue with all these different versions that you have certain images stuck in your head, and especially because this is a story used so often for children. All this talk about Marley's ghost, I'm still having it stuck in my head, and images of Goofy in a Disney version as Marley the ghost with chains on, telling Scrooge the error of his ways. So that's an image that's still hard to get out of my head.
That's coming back to me now. Why would Goofy do that?
It was Donald Duck's uncle who's Scrooge. Yeah.
It's funny they chose Goofy for that.
It's actually when we're going through the ghost of. Yeah, I think it was Goofy that was him, but also like going
more light-hearted. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
more light-hearted take on.
I guess they wanted
Jacob. Yeah, it's actually amazing.
I don't know,
some
maybe
of the
they wanted one that was
versions,
tall and lanky.
I'm sure there's probably versions they have quite famous people playing that role as well. There's a version with Patrick Stewart and stuff. So it's actually interesting to go through and see how they've adapted the character of Jacob and how they've done all the other different ghosts as well. So, but ultimately, this is a really good little version to watch, though.
Oh, definitely. There's actually talking more about versions of this story that I remember from childhood. It's actually quite funny when they're doing the Ghost of Christmas Past and they're showing Scrooge where he apprenticed at. I think it's like Fezziwig & Co. or something. The bookkeeper's company, and I'm just thinking Fezziwig. I mean that. They almost made it compulsory decades later in the Muppet version to make Fozzie Bear the one who apprenticed Scrooge. Yeah.
He's that'll definitely take on a life
the Muppets have done everything, and you know my idea for a Muppet version of the Crucible.
It's actually amazing, but it just has to show you the universality of the story, though, that they can do it in animated, they can do it with very well-known other characters from Disney, from the Henson universe, you know. So it's just a testament to actually how timeless this story is. I'm actually very curious now to watch and some of the other versions that were made around the same time. There's a 1951 version that looks pretty good, that is actually an English adaptation I'd be interested to see. And, you know, Matt and I were discussing the first version was 1901, which was a silent film. So, you know, they've been making this since the dawn. This story has been made in different versions of film, play, TV, since the dawn of being able to even do any of that stuff. So, yeah.
Well, it's a very how shall I put it? It has, because you have the three spirits for one thing. It's got a very strong visual quality that would lend it well to silent films. And even though a lot of people forget it, the social message that it originally had, there's still an underlying moral quality to it that can reach to, although people often try and just preach to young audiences, like I said, it can reach well to adults. Of course, we have something of a reverse issue in our time where it's become so taken for granted to be materialistic.
I mean,
but in a way, it means really. That sort of we have to look at the Scrooge in all of us and try and open up. And well, there are some that critique this, and this is why I think it's partly important to remember what a 19th century social policy that effectively believed that it was you were almost endorsing evil economic systems by giving poor relief because it sustained systems that didn't work, and you had excess population that shouldn't be sustained, that sort of thing. So politics could be quite harsh at that time. But I think one reason to remember that is that there are accusations now these days of the story having anti-Semitic qualities, and there is some justification in that, because being that Scrooge in the storyline is a money lender, which is a profession that a lot of Jewish people were forced into because of the Christian church banning money lending from the Middle Ages, and later there is argument that the Scrooge could be associated with Jewish stereotypes, but we must remember that it wasn't just confined to anti-Semitic debates, that those sorts of negative qualities that we think of with Scrooge are pushed in that way. It was a much broader issue at the time.
There is actually a lot
it is a valid thing to consider an interpretation, but you shouldn't write the story off because of that.
There's so much to research that we wouldn't even be able to touch on here, and a lot of what Matt talks about in relation to how society was set up at the time. You know, remember, it was the throes of the Industrial Revolution, also the Victorian era itself. There's a whole chapter and verse on that you could discuss all the different elements of the Victorian era from the time that she came to the throne to the time that she died. And that's obviously true with her great-granddaughter that has passed away recently. So, but a very fascinating, and I'm definitely over this holiday period going to explore a little bit more of the Charles Dickens universe, for sure. So thank you for everyone for bearing with us this year and joining us. The episodes we did manage to get out, at least we've kept going. And as I said to Matt before we started recording, that's one, we started doing this at the start of COVID. We're still here and we're still trying to get out. We're probably going to have a bit more of a balanced schedule next year between this and our other podcast, A Glimpse of Hell, which is sort of like, how would we describe that, Matt? We kind of do true crime, but it's more historical true crime that we focus on, because there's so many modern true crime podcasters. We just kind of wanted to take our interest and maybe take it in a slightly different direction. So we'll definitely be working on that, and we'll be keeping when get. Yes, and some of the old things that happened in, just some things, that certain people made that resulted in the death of thousands of people. And when you actually look at the role they played in it, it's, they may not have actually done the deed themselves with their own hand, but they certainly had a hand in many, many people passing away because of it. So there's lots of really interesting things to discuss. So keep an eye out for that as well, or keep an ear out for that, and we'll make sure we're a bit more active on our social media and stuff too. So but I just wanted to thank you for joining us. Hope you all have a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and we will definitely see you in or you'll be listening to us in 2023. Matt, is there anything you wanted to say just to sign off for this year as well?
Well, we always announce all our new information on our social media channels, and we often find little bits of interesting articles that we'd like to publish that are in relation to our stories. I actually wanted to post an article a few weeks ago, which unfortunately just being a new father, time slipped away from me, and sort of the news item became irrelevant, but we did a feature on the great British war movie, The Dam Busters,
I did read
a few months ago, and I was reading the New York Times that the last member of that squadron passed away at age 101, I think. So, unfortunately, I didn't get to. I didn't get to post that in our channel at the time, but we may as well mention that now. It was
I did read that. Yes,
an important part of history, and we were glad to talk about a very good commemoration of their work. We look forward
definitely. Well, thank you for that, Matt. That was a lovely way to
both celebrating
Have a
adaptations of reality in the new year, and also
2023,
great
and
works of imagination.
See, and you'll hear us in 2023. We really appreciate you all. So thank you so much.